I'm trying. I'm trying.
I'm going to beat you. I'm telling you that.
You're not going to be.
There's one behind you.
Oh, man. Crash and burn.
Too bad, Corey. Guess that makes me the winner. Again.
Temporary winner. I've been holding back. I've been giving
pass.
you a break just so you get the hang of it. But now it's time to teach you a little respect.
Right. But it'll have to be next time. It's almost fourth period, and I do not want to get caught in here.
But Jenny, hold up. Look, I brought a disc, and we could copy this, okay? And we can play it on my brother's computer.
Okay, no problem. All we got to do is... Whoa.
Are you sure you know what you're doing?
Did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're gonna make a copy of a game without paying? Come on, guys. I thought you knew better. Don't copy that floppy.
But wait a minute. Who the heck are you anyway?
Yeah, and what are you doing on our computer?
I'm your MC, double dab. PP, that's the disc protector. For you and the posse, that's the artists, writers, designers, and programmers that works up the images for games and grammar that let you learn, but also play the game you came here for today. Now, I know you love the games, and that's all right to do, because the posse who makes them, they love them too. But if you start stealing, there's no more they can do.
But I just wanted to make one copy.
You say, I'll just make a copy for me and a friend. Then he'll make one and she'll make one, and where will it end? One leads to another, then 10, then more. And no one buys anything from the store. So no one gets paid and they can't make more. The posse breaks up and then closes the stores. Don't copy that floppy. So let me break this down for you. No common San Diego, no more Oregon Trail. Tetris and the others, they're all gonna fail. Not because we want it, but because you're just taking it. Disrespecting all the folks who are making it. The more you take, the less there will be. The disc becomes fewer, the games fall away. The screen starts to shrink and then it will fade. Programs fall through a black hole in space. The computer world becomes bleak and stark. Loses its life and the screen goes to dark. Welcome to the end of the computer age.
Okay, so as you can see there, the reason why that was ineffective is because even back in 1992, that was lame, never mind now. The sad part is that, quick note, is that 2 years ago they actually made an update to this about modern day piracy in times, and I was debating of showing that to you guys, but then I found out that in the United States they legally play that video to medically induce vomiting towards patients. So if you want to find that, you can go look for it yourself. I'm not playing it here. Welcome to my talk. It's Homebrew versus Piracy. I originally came up with this talk about, sadly, 2 years ago at the Last Hope. I did it on an off track because I realized both talking to a lot of computer hobbyists as well as people in the game industry that there's been a lot of myths and confusions about exactly what homebrew is and what piracy is and how the two relate to each other. And a lot of people even think they know a lot about either homebrew techniques or about how piracy operates. It's not quite complete, so I'm going to try to see how much I can cover today. So first, you're probably kind of curious about something. First question might come to mind is, who the fuck is Sidepocket? Well, to explain myself, I am an International Game Developers Association member, card carrying from 2004 to present. Basically, that means I get a bunch of discounts and free beer when I go to various game demoing places. I also attended the Game Developers Conference in 2006, 2008. And by the way, pardon any spelling mistakes in these, which is basically a giant tech conference in California, usually held in San Francisco. But it's like 10 times bigger than this, and you learn a lot of new stuff. Coolest thing I've ever demoed, using brainwaves to control video games. I also hang around the New York City hacker scene, even though I live in New Jersey. My whole thing is I feel like I live close enough to it that I can basically haunt it without considering a tourist, but I'm far enough away that I have things like a lawn and personal space. But I often hang out on NYC Resistor, Alpha One Labs. I attend the New York City 2600 meetings. I am also a Yes Men activist. Due to time, I had a video, but I'll just quickly say it. The Yes Men basically pretend to be corporate entities in order to expose evil stuff that they do, and that's always fun. There's actually an event in New York City tomorrow. I can't reveal what it is, but look out for it. It'll be pretty fun. And I'm also with the Phone Losers, so Cactus, et cetera, et cetera. So enough about my boring ass. Oh, one more thing. I also made a video game earlier this year. It's called Go Fat Hamster Go. I was actually wondering if I could really quickly show you what that is, just for like 5 seconds. It's at this event called the Global Gaming Jam. And, sorry, it's a little loud. And what it is that you have to basically, you're thrown together with a bunch of random people and you have to create a video game in 3 days. And for our local chapter, we actually won. That's why I hate Windows. So yeah, it was pretty fun, and I got a lot of attention for it. All right, so enough about boring me. First, I want to go through of what this talk is not about. I am not going to teach you how to modify consoles for black market sale and profit. I think you guys can figure that out on your own. Also, how to hack server codes so you can start pwning people in video games. You know, you could, but it's like, do I really want to? And how to crack CD keys. I'm not going to show you examples of that because not only do I not want to, but I'd be thrown in jail for that. How to steal files off of various game servers, and I'm also not going to tell you how to get eFlask. However, this is what the talk will be about, which is what is the exact definition of homebrew, what is the exact definition of piracy, and that, because the thing is, they're so close together with various techniques they do, it's hard to discern. I'm sure a lot of you guys are intelligent to know the difference, but I definitely want to go over that. I'm also going to go through the history of homebrew and piracy in video games and how it basically shaped the way video games are processed today. I'm going to also go through modern day homebrew, and I did had a live example on my own Wii, but I'll see due to time if I could show that off. Myths and perceptions of video game piracy. When I did my research and I started to meet up with people who modified consoles and people who gold farmed and stuff, I was actually surprised for the reasons of why they did it, and I'm going to go a little bit into that. Possible future solutions, and then I'm going to open for Q&A, thanks, blah, 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 blah. First, a quick legal disclaimer. This talk is for information purposes only. So I am not a lawyer. I try to do this advice as accurate as I can, but you know, information changes all the time. I kept having to actually revise this because information constantly changed. Piracy is a crime in the United, I don't have to tell you this, but you know, just for legal notice, in the United States and any World Trade Organization member. I would technically say the world, but there's actually a lot of places that don't enforce copyright and piracy. And so in general, if that country is part of a World Trade Organization, they do enforce it, although there's varying degrees. For instance, Iran actually dropped out of that, so there's actually a ton of illegal software in Iran, but under their government, it's legal. And of course, due to their military and stuff, no one wants to engage Iran. So that's a good example. Homebrew and pirate at your own risk. If you do or find any of these techniques that I may talk about, and you do it in your system bricks or somehow feds come up at the door, although that's rare, please do not cry to me. I know that sounds stupid, but like, you know, when we do stuff, when I do my own stuff, you have a chance of getting bricked. You have a chance of a lawsuit happening. So I say that. And piracy, like I said before, changes from country to country. You have been warned. So first, I want to go to a quick overview of the problem. The video game industry is basically huge. The video game industry alone in 2008 generated $11.7 billion in profit. That is a huge chunk of money. This is why Hollywood is jealous of video games, because they actually make more net profit than them overall with the various Hollywood agencies. And like any other industry, the video game industry is a bottom-line profit-driven system where companies rise and fall on the edge of a dime, literally. It's weird saying that, but due to a lot of game users, we often forget that it's called the video game industry. Most people see the game part of it. Oh, Timmy's playing with his DS, that's cute and fun. But you don't see that there's a lot of business transactions. Who owns what properties? I sell you this property. We're dissolving this company so we can save money, all of that. So that's a big reminder, because as you're going to see when I go through the history, this motive drives everything. So how does piracy affect this? Global piracy cost the industry $3 billion in 2007. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but there's two things missing from this data, which when I looked up at the ESA, they classified. One is that It does not include piracy on the internet. There's no way to exactly track piracy on the internet. So this leaves, so basically the $3 billion is just by burning disks and trading alone worldwide. Costs $3 billion. So you can only imagine when you add the internet with that, how much piracy takes away. It also only includes the people that they actually arrested and caught. So there's a lot of people who've gotten away with this who are making buttloads of money, and that in 2008, the ESA filed out 700 infringement notices and 6 million takedown notices in the United States alone. And so this is how epidemic piracy gets. Here's a classic example. Who plays Modern Warfare 2? Does anyone play that game? Yeah. It's awesome, pretty game. Good 3 people, because normally when you have tech conferences, surprisingly, a lot of people don't play video games. But came in 2009. It was a Game Year Award winner. I was supposed to put the metric score, but I believe it was 9.7. Basically, a shit ton of people love this game. And the great news for Activision, sold 4.7 million units. So I want to ask everyone, guess how many times it was pirated? Just in general, over torrents, burned. Does anyone want to pull a number out of their ass? 9 million. 9 million? 9,001. You got that right, at least. It was pirated 4.1 million times. So sold 4.7 million units, but also, so basically they could have actually doubled their figure number, but due to piracy they only got half. Not to say that they crashed and burned, they made a lot of money, but to the company's bottom line, you want to make max profit, and when you take away half, it cuts into it. You want to say something quick, or? Right. That's true. There is a discrepancy about that. I don't know exactly. It sadly probably doesn't include that. But I'm just basically extrapolating the figures that when you look at to a company's perspective, that's almost half of their revenue gone that they could have made. Because a lot of things, sadly, is not what things are, but what the company perceives them as, which I'll get into a little bit later on. Good question. I'll have Q&A at the end, so if anyone has any questions, let me know. So here's some common base things, questions about piracy. It's illegal to download any paid game without paying. Many games are actually, especially now, free on the internet. It's been a big new trend for that. And also, depending on when their copyright laws expire, it's technically okay to download it. Sometimes, like recently with retro games, they renew those copyright laws, so you have to pay attention. But generally, if the copyright bowed out, which usually takes about, if I remember correctly, most games would have expired their copyright. Most of our old 16-bit classic games in 2030. So once that happens, unless they're renewed, it's okay for that. And it's also okay to make backup copies for games, like the Infernal video says, that still applies. Another one is that age of a title is not a factor. It's very complicated, but basically that even though it's in public domain, it really is on like a company basis, because even though the video game industry is young, they're not stupid, and they love to control basically everything that they own. So sometimes even if it's offered, you should go to the website and see, because often if it's a game you can download fair, it's usually downloaded right off their website. So even if it expires, but it's on a different server, they might still be gunning for people for it, although it might not actively. It's a kind of a big mess, but that's one misconception. Piracy is bad in all forms. A lot of people have said that, especially in the ESA. Piracy, companies have actually used pirating techniques to their own advantage in the past. They've used various things, overriding chips and stuff, to get their product out. So that's one interesting thing that pirates, everyone, the industry is like, piracy is all bad. And meanwhile, they do the same exact stuff that a lot of pirates and homebrew people do that they then, if you're an individual person, they hate, but they'll do it for their own game. And as I'll explain later, pirates often use their piracy as a source of income, which I'll get to a little bit later on in this talk. I know it's hard to read this, but basically mod chips are still illegal, because when software is one thing, hardware is another thing. When you modify the exact hardware, that is like a physical direct thing that they copyright, and their excuse is that they do all that for security reasons. They don't want people to cheat online. They also don't want other companies to reverse engineer their own software to make derivatives of that. So basically, if you put any sort of chip, even if it's, weirdly enough, blinking lights in your system, you've technically voided your warranty, and most companies will either go out and brick you or send out a notice to you. Or if you have online services, for example, they will ban your online service altogether. So now, which is probably the longest part of the talk that I'm going to gun through, is the overall history of homebrew and piracy. And it's Piracy and Homebrew have been affecting the video game community so long that we have to actually start exactly right at Genesis. So, does anyone recognize who the hell this man is? I know he seems like some random old man, but if you love hardware and if you know video games, everyone should know this man. Sadly, most people don't. I know Jason does. Yep, Ralph Baer. Ralph Baer, I actually got to meet him at GDC 2008. He's an awesome man. He was born in March 8 in Germany, and when the Nazis came in, he was supposed to go to an all-Jewish school, and they didn't like it, so they moved to the United States. And he graduated, he did a lot of jobs. His first one was a radio service technician, 1940s, and he fought in World War II. And he actually was going to be sent to a battle that a lot of people died in, but due to an injury, he copped out, so thank God, because then we wouldn't probably have video games. And Baer graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree. So this is basically what he did. He worked for Magnavox for adjusting television signals before shipping. If you look at any old television, particularly from 60s and 70s, there seems to be like a little box that's missing on the front of it. They used to have transistors in the front that they would test the vertical and the horizontal before they shipped it off, and they would take that device out. Well, Baer was very interested in manipulating this device, so he actually requested his own room at Magnavox and would take spare parts that they would throw out with TVs and sat there, and he basically took the box, extended it, and figured out how to interpolate the TV signal so that you could actually manipulate the audio and the vertical and horizontal from a distance. And he figured out how to do lines, dots, and dashes, and it basically became the brown box, which then became the Magnavox Odyssey, the first video game console in the 70s, and spawned an industry that later made $4.7 billion. So, in short, important notice that the video game industry began with Homebrew. It began tinkering around with TVs, and we discovered an entire new industry. So for the video game industry to attack Homebrew communities to try to prevent piracy, or for new technologies to come out, is basically shitting in their own bed. Because we need Homebrew all the time, because these are the people who have enough time to think of creative stuff to use. So that's a very big point right there. So after the Magnavox Odyssey and a bunch of clones, we get to video games in the early years. Which basically, I forgot to put those in. But anyhow, yeah, this is an error in my slide. There's a NOTACON trivia thing, ask me later. I sadly didn't have enough time to put that in, sorry. But anyhow, so yeah, I'm all crazy. Factors in early video game piracy. Atari had this really evil policy in order to control their own software, that when teams made a game, usually about 3 to 5 people, sometimes even one person, they'd make a game, put it out, but no one would get credited for making the game. And of course, if you're an artist or a designer and you've had to work on the same shitty code for 6 months to even a couple of years and finally come out, and then they don't put your name on it, it would piss you off, wouldn't it? So a lot of developers started to rebel in certain ways, such as making secret levels where their names were actually in the object area, or sticking in the code, or even sharing internal company secrets between companies in order to sabotage your own company. And the other thing about contributing to what will eventually be a big piracy boom is computers were not that well known at the time in general public like it is now. Like, people at least know what a computer is now. Generally not very common knowledge. Most people weren't programmers, so there was really no need to protect any of the game code that was done on the cartridges. And for a good example of that, and also how bad the copyrights law came, ColecoVision actually had an Atari 2600 expansion where you attach this module to the ColecoVision and you could plug in and play 2600 games, which were their direct company rival. If any of this, imagine today, Sony comes out for their PS3, a dongle that you plug into the PS3 to run Xbox 360 games, they would get sued up the wazoo for that. So it really shows you how much laws and the concept of who owns rights to technology has changed over the years. And then, unfortunately, it led to the video game crash of 1983. Piracy did contribute to the crash. A lot of people took games, changed a few things, the code, and then released them out as their own stuff, because anyone, if you were one person, you could make your own game company. However, what the industry doesn't talk about is a lot of other things contributed to that were more serious, such as consumer confusion about hardware, cutthroat business practices, and wasteful spending. As Nolan Bushnell once said, I can make more money than I could piss away. You should never say that. That's why his company basically crashed in the first place, because when they went to get money, they didn't have any on reserve, and they basically folded in to each other. and especially the consumer hardware thing, because these are people who are used to buying radios and TVs, so it's like, I had the same TV for 10 years. I've had the same radio for 15 years. You're telling me that every 1 to 5 years I have to upgrade my own video console? It's ridiculous. So a lot of people stopped supporting the industry. And when it crashed, basically from 1983 to around like 1985, 86, no video games came out. There were video games, mainly on the PC, but they were often called, they were either pinned up on the board with like a floppy and a Ziploc, or they were sold as simulation software. And because there was only PC games left, the PC game industry boomed, a huge deal, which will affect it later. And then around 1985, the industry turned Japanese. The Nintendo made this thing called the Famicom. It was a toy company previously, and also had the license to sell Atari 2600 games in Japan. The thing is because video games crashed, no one didn't really believe in the video game market, so the big question was how to bring the video game industry back to life and also don't fall for the same mistakes they did. So basically they came up with these solutions. They renamed the Famicom to the Nintendo Entertainment System, and they sold it as a computer system. Sold it with ROM and a bunch of different various programs and stuff, and they would sell that in computer stores by saying you were buying a computer. They also created the Nintendo Seal of Approval. That was their way of, it was basically approved by Nintendo. They made the cartridges, so if that was that was an official game. They also had this bullshit policy of releasing only 5 games per year. So anyone out there, every year there was only 5 games every single year. So you would have like 20 companies wanting to release their game, but they could only pick 5, and companies would have to wait like 3 to 6 years for any of their games to come out. Meanwhile, they're bleeding money. And that you also must be a licensed developer for Nintendo, and any game that comes out on their system must be exclusive for a minimum of 2 years. So there was a lot of rigorous policy that Nintendo thought would curb piracy. Ironically, there was a huge backlash. Game developers came up to circumvent the lockout chip, which was known as the 10NS, which I'll talk to in a little bit, mostly by sending a volt of electricity through the cartridge to short it out. My favorite one is how Tekken when Atari collapsed, they came from their arcade wing and formed, and so they wanted to release their games. They're bleeding money. They want to get it out there. They tried reverse engineering the blockout chip, but they couldn't figure it out. So what they actually did was they sent their lawyers over to the U.S. copyright facility and said that we're going to file a suit against Nintendo. We need to look at their copyright files. And they looked through them, found the chip, took pictures of how the chip worked, of the entire copyright of how it worked, and then that's how they circumvented the chip. Nintendo went to sue them out of hell, but they got locked up in the court, and it never kind of got resolved. So that's one good example of how game companies aren't saints either. And other companies such as Sega and NEC filled the void by releasing Master System, Genesis, TurboGrafx by saying, hey, we don't have those rough policies. We release any game you submit, in about 6 months we'll send it right out there. You don't have to be exclusive or anything. So Nintendo actually lost a lot of, they could have owned most of their base, but they lost half of it due to their strict policies, which a lot of them carry over today. This is the lockout chip. A very similar model also appeared internally inside the Super NES, known as the 10NES. And the reason I brought you that is because this is how the Game Genie works. Here's a great way to circumvent that chip. Basically, it's a device that, has anyone owned a Game Genie or use it? Yeah, awesome. So yeah, you pretty much know how it works, but just to cover it over, you plug the thing on top, put it in, and basically it uses a bypass system. So when the game loads its code in, it replaces, you input letters, and it uses 6 to 8-bit codes. They're translated into the address and data of where it is in the game cartridge, so that when the game cartridge tries to load its data, it loads in that other piece of data. As you can see here, basically any code that you put in, the various letters you translate into those hex, you pop them into this ideogram and that one, so you can see like gossip and on. Get those, and it comes out that binary string, so it knows that the address is at that hex, and the data put in is 14. So you do that, you get like 20 lives instantly, and that's how you had all these cheats for the Game Genie. And of course, Nintendo absolutely hated this thing. They sued them for copyright infringement and derivative work, but the court actually denied Nintendo's motion because they argued fair use. As you see from this quote, having paid Nintendo fair return, the consumer can experiment with their own equipment as long as they're basically not selling it they can do anything they want with it. It's weird because now the industry, it's sort of like almost 180'd in that now. It's like, you can't do anything. You're technically borrowing from us. So it was amazing that back then they kind of passed that. Nintendo actually tried to then circumvent the Game Genie when they lost the court case by using ROM checksums, but later Game Genies actually hid the modifications in the checksum routines. And then, which was, like I said, with third parties, Sega adopted the Game Genie as an official product. So they totally support it, which added more fan base to them, which more crippled Nintendo's business policy. All right, I'm going to try to rush through more of this. I was supposed to put data there, but this is, and this is why they actually sued, because companies like Wisdom Tree. There was one game that they came out, great example. There was a lot of other games like this called Super 3D Noah's Ark. Wisdom Tree makes all these weird Bible games. And using that same type of system, basically, you put it on the cartridge in, and so the system would have to ask for a verification. It passed through up into the cartridge, get the verification that it's a real game, but when it loads the data down, the cartridge then blocks the data and loads its data in, thus circumventing the anti-piracy chip. And that's how a lot of companies got their stuff through. And then we wind up basically, a couple of things later, the compact disc era with the PlayStation, which was birthed by treachery. Supposed to make basically Nintendo contracted both Sony and Philips to make CD extensions for the Super Nintendo, but they didn't tell either of them that they were both doing it. And Sony and Philips are both enemies. And when Sony found out, and then they also got rejected by Nintendo, they decided to release the CD as their own. And the PlayStation was born, which further crippled Nintendo's hold. Compact discs were basically fun. It was the first use of CD encryption when they came out, but the problem was that commercial CD burners actually made piracy easier because you could buy CDs. They're really dirt cheap now, but you know, it's a bunch of CDs for like $20, and it's better than what you had to do where you had to actually know circuitry and solder together your own game cart if you wanted to pirate. So it actually made piracy a lot easier. It also allowed for more storage data and more digitized form of media. You could store high quality pictures, FMV, and etc. And once cracked, basically, a CD drive is a CD drive, so you could play any CD material if you override their codes, such as you know, various movies and programs. And that's actually kind of what happened. There was a big VCD boom. Before DVDs, there was VCDs, basically a CD with a movie on it. And in Asia, PlayStation actually made a model of this. A bunch of Asian companies copied this model as a standalone that you plugged in to play VCD movies, and it was extremely popular in Asia and Europe. And then we also arrived in the internet era. This is around the early 90s. People didn't quite know what the internet was, but more people were catching up to it. So users started to become more familiar. World Wide Web, gaming sites started to show up. But then users could actually share data from game saves to video games, which they could then modify the actual save file. And they could also share exactly how they pirate and modify their games. And due to CD-based encryption and protection keys being broken, this is the start of the fall to the PC gaming industry. Because the reason why you don't really hear about a lot of PC games today is because, besides company screw-ups, that piracy is so rampant that it's like, what's the point in selling a PC game? One of the weirdest things to come out was called Bleem. It was a virtual emulator and allowed to play PlayStation games on the IBM PC in 1999. It was a legal device. They went through copyrights and everything. They approved this thing, but Sony got pissed because, hey, you're not running on a PlayStation. You don't need to buy a PlayStation. You just run the disc. And basically, they sued them to oblivion. So they sadly don't exist anymore. This really shows how ruthless companies can get. Sadly, this side is blank, but let me explain this. Nintendo in Japan actually tried to support a form of homebrew called the 64DD. I wish I had a picture of this. You put the Nintendo 64 on top of this thing, had its own ROM files, and also had video out, so you could plug in your own camcorders and record yourself, make mini movies, make music that you could save as MP3s, little slideshow things. But due to poor marketing and a bunch of other things, it fell apart in Japan, so they didn't sell it anywhere else. And then, which I classify as part of this era, the Sega Dreamcast GD-ROM. Sega wanted to use a GD-ROM. It's basically a CD that's formatted in such a way that holds a gigabyte. And it was used for more storage space. And because there aren't any GD-ROM burners besides Sega, they thought that would not, you couldn't pirate this thing because you could only pull so much. Like basically, it was text data. Like if you put in any headers or anything, you could pull that out, but you couldn't pull out the entire data. The ironic thing is, though, is that the Sega decided to use the Windows CE platform as their main platform for loading. So if you know Windows, you could pretty much figure most of this stuff out. So it was kind of useless in the first place. And ironically, for Sega, the Dreamcast actually still lives on through Homebrew. There are still games being ported and made today for the Dreamcast because of the huge Dreamcast Homebrew scene. So that's one way that Homebrew actually benefits the industry, is that it keeps consoles still living, to the point where Nintendo still repairs all their old consoles all the way up to, I think they recently discontinued the Famicom and, yeah, just the Famicom in Japan, because they still sell those things. And then the competition heats up real quick. PlayStation 2 actually came out with a Linux kit. I don't know if anyone heard this, but yeah, you got keyboard, USB adapter, VGA adapter, 40 gigabyte hard drive, and this disc, and the 8 megabyte memory required. And PlayStation 2 didn't really have much memory in it, but the fact that you could put Linux on it, people just went wild with this thing. There was a lockout to prevent PS1 and PS2 games, but I heard it was basically recently overridden, and that they no longer support this, but the homebrew community in there is still going on. They actually found a CD distro to go around it that basically emulates their main CD. So there's still Linux going on PS2. And for the Xbox and GameCube, when you modify, particularly an Xbox, they make very good, cheap, low-level PCs. A lot of actually third-world places take Xboxes, modify them, and sell them as desktop systems for people to use, because you buy them for $99, you sell them for $30, and most people can afford that, as opposed to paying like $800 for something that is basically obsolete when you take it out of the box. The Microsoft Xbox Live Service was not implemented until a year later, because that's its main feature. And most people remember that, but they don't realize there was a year where there was no online games, and GameCube games wasn't existent. So people actually circumvented the LAN options on these consoles to run it through the internet proxy so that you could play online. There was actually a lot of early Halo 1 matches using the LAN proxy before Xbox Live came out, and until they made the PC version of the game. And then there was the big internet piracy boom. Torrent programs evolving from old Napster, bless its heart, such as Kazaa and BearShare, even though they're crap programs now, rapidly spread pirated games. It's very easy. You just load the program, click, search the name, click, and you got a game. You can burn that to a disk, or you could run it off an emulator on your PC. International pirate groups started to sell illegal games on their own servers to other countries because their laws were very different. So a lot of places where piracy were, they sell that out. You cannot basically attack a Chinese server. There you go. And bad security decisions and ineffective anti-piracy prevention nearly killed the PC game industry. It's slowly recovering, but basically in a nutshell that happened. So now we arrive to modern day stuff. Wow, big history lesson. Nintendo Wii has the most modified stuff out there because it's basically a GameCube with twice the RAM. There was this, the main thing was how to access it, because there was a GameCube mode and a Wii mode, and there was a GameCube mode, and we've done a lot of GameCube homebrew, but no one really knew how to get to the data of that. And then they found what's known as the Twilight hack. It was found by Team Tweezers of WiiHomebrew.org, and it exploits a buffer overflow. Anytime you do something with the Wii to open it up, it's a buffer overflow system. And basically, Twilight, when you named the horse, it can only have a certain amount of characters. If you put in way too many characters, I think it's like 499 characters, it has to store all that extra data somewhere. So then it tries to offload it to its CPU memory. But when it does that, kind of like the old wisdom tree system, it stops the offload of that data and it puts a program off your SD card in there instead, and basically unlocks the GameCube mode. So you can run all various, they currently have Linux on this thing and all sorts of stuff, including its own homebrew channel, where doing this, such as another thing called Smash Attack, anything that buffer overloads, they actually figured out how channels work by dissecting it. So when you install it, it's actually a channel on your Wii. You can move it around, delete it, and add stuff to it, just like any channel on your Wii console. And I was supposed to have a live demonstration, but sadly for time, I'm going to have to skip it. I'm sorry. For the Smash Stack demo, which basically the demo level editor only can store a certain amount of data on it before it has to overflow. The Xbox is 360 is actually, it's cracked, but it took a while because basically, and I had to sit through a Microsoft conference where they explained all the hardware. All the circuits in the 360 doesn't know what its neighbor is basically doing. So imagine that you have a group of people in a room and they're blindfolded, and so they can basically feel the objects that they're trying to put together, but they can't directly see it. And it passes data through this. And so because of that sort of hardware setup, it took a while before people started figuring out the circuitry and stuff. Plus that the circuits kind of sucked because they rushed it out to market. But ironically, they didn't do anything for the 360 gamepad. And like the Wii remote, you can use that to program robots and all sorts of stuff. And if you want to learn more, there's going to actually be a workshop by Jeezy P Freak on Saturday at about 3 o'clock in the workshop room. So if you want to learn more about how to do 360 gamepads, check it out. There's also other 360 tricks, such as Microsoft came out with NXA, where they tried to make a very basically controlled do-it-yourself code. They figured if they give the public a way to code games, that then eventually they'll approach them, get licenses, and sell them. Now, you don't need to do that. In fact, the game I just showed you, Go Fat Hamster Go, was programmed on NXA, and we did it for free. I actually remember when I had to beta test this thing. And they actually did try to open it up more, but it didn't quite work out due to business practices, so it's back to its old model. You can also modify the casing, add blinkies, weird shapes, etc. And the funny thing, quick funny story, Xbox Live, the servers are really hard to get into. I will not recommend trying to attempt that. You might get like a hex data or so, but then you will instantly get blocked out. However, they didn't say nothing about basically their tech support. If you know someone else's data, they automatically assume that you're the owner, so you can actually email or call up Microsoft tech support, and if you have like the username and password for the game tag, and you can say, I want to disable the account, you could disable all your friends' accounts and stuff like that. I actually had to bring that up to Microsoft. They didn't have an answer to how do you stop something like that. And the other thing about Microsoft is that they actually actively scan their 360s to see if you modify anything. If you add anything to the circuitry that is out of normal, they will basically instantly ban your live account. And of course, downfall hilarity clips ensure, where you have Hitler outbursts of how they banned his Xbox Live account, and that was really negative publicity towards Microsoft. And lastly, for modern day stuff, we have PlayStation 3 and Linux. PlayStation 3 is actually the most open out of all the consoles. On the older versions, I hate to say this now, you can actually install Linux directly onto the PlayStation 3. You have Yellow Dog, Debian, Fedora, Gentoo, OpenSUSE, Ubuntu, can all run on the PlayStation 3 platform. The thing is that due to the hypervisor, the RS graphics chip is locked, and people are still working out how to open it. They're experimenting right now, trying to get through the Linux kernel and using the Windows X system, but when it unlocks, we'll be able to do cool graphics stuff. Because the cell chip itself could do graphics, but it doesn't have the amount of teraflops due to the way the cell's poorly designed in order to work. So you really need the graphics chip to do any 3D graphical stuff. Now here's the problem. PlayStation 3 recently remodeled their system, the PlayStation 3 Slim, and because they had the Slim stuff down, you can't use that feature anymore. However, people are now working on software workarounds for that, particularly George Hollis is creating a custom firmware. He's actually going to try to emulate PS3 firmware that you can install on that so that you can still use that function. So hopefully we'll still have Linux on our PlayStation 3s. And now for what will basically be the last part is all about pirates. By the way, can everyone hear me fine? Okay, good, because I tend to mumble. First, the exact definition of homebrew. I tried to simplify it because there's a lot more complicated definition than this, but basically, to make a video game console do something it was not originally designed to do. This is where hackers come in, because that's basically what I feel a hacker does. They take a device that's supposed to do this, like scissors are supposed to cut things, but what if you take it apart and use it as an art thing, or what if you redone it so you can scrape stuff out? Things that the designer originally didn't intended to do. You could do the same thing with video game consoles. In fact, it's even more of a challenge for people, and people love that challenge, because you're not supposed to break apart the video game system and program stuff on there, but you can. So it's like more of a challenge thing. And the main thing about homebrew is that it's all for fun. They do it because they bought the object, they feel like they're obliged to it, and they want to see all the crazy stuff they can do with it. Make it blink, make it connect to the internet, program games on it. They're not out there for money. I mean, some people do modify things and sell them, but most people who do homebrew are doing it for fun. So then we get to what basically piracy is, which is the use of hardware and software exploits to run software on a video game console without the original creator's consent, for profit or for free. So if you have something that they sell and you want to do it for free, and you don't have their consent to hand it out for free or use it for free, wrong. If you are also reselling that game for profit, which happens a lot everywhere, that's also wrong. And it's very important to say these definitions, because what the game industry does is they lump the two together, because homebrew and pirates use very similar techniques. In fact, basically, for a homebrew group will discover something that then pirates will use to pirate data off of said thing. For example, in the Wii homebrew scene, they unlocked the DVD player, because it's basically a DVD player. They just have an access chip. Knock that off, it plays any DVDs. And so they're like, oh, cool, we can play DVD movies now. Pirates saw that and said, wait, not only can't you play DVD movies, you can play anything on this thing. So all we have to do is burn the code to disk, and once that's knocked out, you can run stuff. So we can run all of our illegal games on there. And that's why most homebrew communities are sadly very, very secretive about their information, because they don't want pirates to get hold of this. And it's something that I often have to talk about in the game industry. Homebrew people are trying to work for you. your problem is that your policy is because you basically can't tell the difference between someone using this for homebrew and piracy, you lump them together. It's basically as if you got gangrene on your thumb, and so to the video game solution would be to chop off the entire hand. So instead of actually cutting it off from the source, you're cutting all the extra good stuff too. I want to go also quickly about some myths about video game pirates. Most pirates are not actively malicious. I mean, I've downloaded, ROMs and stuff before, not really anything recent, but that's what I do. Most people are not thinking, oh yeah, I'm doing something evil, ah ha ha. It's just like, oh, there's this new game, or I haven't played this game in forever, or wow, this is rare, and they go do it. And also, most people do it once or twice, and that's it. They don't actively do it. So that's one big myth, because in the game industry, you talk to people, they basically act like there's like a platoon out there scheming out for them, like, ooh, these pirates, they sneak around, and it's like anonymous or something, or they have their own little mask, and they go in and they steal all our crap. And the other major thing is many pirates who pirate software are actually from third world countries who either can't afford the software they're selling. That happened a lot in Russia, where they didn't license the NES for Russia. There was no license for that, particularly with the whole Soviet Union blockade. So programmers there actually took that, remade the NES, and they called it the Dendy. So if you go to Russia, they still call Nintendo stuff Dendy, because that was their only exposure to that, because Nintendo didn't sell their own stuff there, and the Dendy people made a killing off of it. So they either can't afford it, or they pirate games to earn a living. These are people, they live in, desolate stuff. Okay, desolate stuff, so yeah, desolate places and things. So they need an income. And most forms of pirating are actually source code leaks done by companies' own employees. Whether they're pissed off at their boss or they've over-censored a game, they will leak that code on the internet. So since I'm running out of time, I'll get through. Quick thing about the pirate 2 chain of types. Pirate type 1 is basically you and me. We use simple techniques. Simplest one is to actually open the game case, look at the CD code, copy it down, and so when you download off the internet, you get friend CD, you just put that CD code in and you're in the game. You'd be surprised how many people actually use that to get past the CD code thing. Or you get the CD code from your friend or download it, for example. And we do it because we're easy. We're the bottom feeders. We only do it once or twice, and we just do it because it's fun. Then you have type 2s, like I said, they live in poor, impoverished conditions or in heavily censored nations such as Iran. They basically pirate mod systems and gold farming to feed themselves or to feed their family. And the reason why they do it is because it's better than the alternative stuff to make income, which is sell drugs, prostitution, kill people, money laundering, etc. They actually sat there and went, okay, I can either do drugs or I can just rip code because that's what I know how to do. I'm going to rip the code. Because pirates basically have a conscience. And then type 3s are the most dangerous. They have knowledge of scripting and gaming inside out, and they basically spread it because it's fun. They just love to do it. They just love the whole mass panic sort of thing, like, ha-ha, screw the company, ha-ha. And they're basically gimps, because the more restrictive stuff you put in their way, they're more excited to pirate it. So you put more DRMs and stuff, they're like, yes, and they knock everything down, because the whole thing is getting in there to pirate. It's basically saying, you can't have this, and that's their thrill. The good thing about them is that there's not that many of them. So companies basically don't have to worry about them that much, even though they do. And for example, like I said, DRM, access technology out, such as secure ROM. Basically, you need a code, or basically you need to connect the internet in order to run the game. So you have to be contacted to the internet 24/7 in order to use it. The problem is everyone hates this because not everyone's connected to the internet. It slows the game down, requires extra resources and stuff. For example, in Mass Effect and Sport for the PC, when people found out they were DRM, there was actually huge boycotts of not to buy the game. And people were actually like sending angry emails to EA, and there was even small groups of people with signs protesting in front of EA until they got rid of the DRM, which they did for their profit bottom line. And real quick, here's just one more one for shits and giggles. And then there's other efficient methods such as piracy raids and crackdowns. It's only a small percentage of people, and much like the drug wars, it's only there for publicity. They're just doing that to, yay, we're doing something, when in reality, it's not really doing that much. And server-side content only gets rid of the bottom feeders. People can still manipulate data on the client side, especially when you have common scripting methods like Python and Lua to bind your game together to do the server. Easy to do. So real quick, possible futures and solutions. Here's some possible futures. Here's a scary one, video game pirateering. If you remember the Caribbean, most pirates weren't just selling to everything. They were actually, the British would say, steal everything from France and we'll pay you. And that's how they ran operations in the Caribbean. So most people that we thought were pirates are actually pirateers. They're working for people in order to sabotage the other members. I'm afraid that this might actually happen in video games, where let's say EA, I'm not saying they would, but EA, you know, they have, Activision has Guitar Hero, they have Rock Band. They don't want to compete, so they're just like, we'll pay you this, your group, your pirate group, we'll sense that, get money, you know, steal their stuff. So that way we edge out in the competition. And the thing is, I wouldn't put it past them, because if you've seen in the past, they will use those things to their own advantage. So never put that out. Total hardware dictatorship, which is basically happening now, but expanding. The thing I hope what happens is free information, do-yourself economy, and download content overrides physical data, where most people are going to be downloading and basically, you know, to basically put out, you know, cheaper games and more people making, you know, users create your own stuff, upload it, let's see what happens. Be awesome. That's what I hope happens. And some simple possible solutions. Base one is if you make a good game and have some good marketing behind it, people will buy it. Most game companies can't afford marketing or they don't make good games. That's why most people don't buy games. So I have to tell that to them constantly. If you make a good game, put some marketing behind it, people will buy it. Most companies don't listen, sadly. And you balance security measures to feed off bottom feeders, but don't make it so hard that people can't access the content. They need to be able to access it easily. And also to reevaluate the pricing system. Most games today are $50 to $80, and they're only about 4 to 6 hours long. That should be to consumers unacceptable. You should be able to price like a 6-hour game for like $10, $20, but they want to make maximum profit off of that. And even though they can make it, put the materials out cheaper, they don't. And also more downloadable and server-side content. There's a big boom for Xbox Live and stuff, and so to download things. So that's some solutions. So quick questions, answers, stories, complaints, or grievances? Yep. Yeah, I actually own that. Yeah. It's basically you play PlayStation games on your Dreamcast, and the thing is, because you have memory, in the original Beam, you had to do memory formation on the hard drive. For Dreamcast, you had to actually reformat the VMU, which was a save system for the Dreamcast, to do it. So that was real fun. Right, that was the advantage of Bleem. Right, which is why it's sad, because PlayStation sued them to oblivion. What they should have done was, hey, can you give us tips and incorporate that? In fact, there's a lot of people who start out in Homebrew and then wound up being part of these corporate entities because of their skills. Yes, sir? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Back then, under Nintendo's laws, they would classify it as that. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. The government thinks, well, as you see, yeah, the problem is, though, is that a lot of companies will use their own power to try to basically make the government work to their side. In the instance, as you saw, when they tried to sue the Game Genie company, it didn't work. But in the current era, there's more and more laws to trying to protect the actual consumer rights person. So it's kind of flopped around since then. So the thing is, in my personal opinion, no, that's not piracy. That's actually rebelling against basically company policy in sort of a bullshit way. But looking at the way that the legal system kind of defines it now and stuff, sadly, you have to go for that, because I'm not in a blue suit and can arrest you, but they can. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but one last quick one? Yes? Yes. I know. The thing is that, yeah, I know. But that's the basic thing, is that it's true. You can't stop it. The only thing you can do is accept that piracy does exist, do enough to, like I said, just bomb feeders will not go for it, and move along. Well, no, not the don't give them ideas. Right. Have them come down to briefing. Right. Some of the guys there about in. Right. I think that'll change their tune. Awesome. Well, I definitely recommend that. In fact, thank you for basically coming to my talk. I'm sorry I was in a rush, but I got late. And my website for stuff. There's a roundtable right after this on the Hannah Room. We're going to be talking about Homebrew and Piracy. I want to hear all of your ideas about what you think piracy, any cool things in Homebrew, what do you think of the the weird diplomacy between the two. So if you want to talk more or have more questions, definitely come to the HANA room on the 3rd floor. It's right past the arcade. And here's also some websites for various homebrew stuff. So thank you for coming to my talk.